welcome everyone. This is your friend Rashmi again. Welcome back to another Recro Talks, and I am a community manager with Recro, wherein I'm working towards building an exclusive community for developers to help you get connected with like-minded people and build your network. Let me quickly introduce Recro also to everyone. So Recro is a developer-focused platform connecting developers with right opportunities, wherein developers are working on latest technology, and Recro is helping developers connect with fast-growing startups such as CureFit, Udan, Swiggy, Danzo, etc. You can also check out the careers page of Recro if you are looking for any such opportunity, and you should find something for yourself. So that's about Recro, and that's about what do we do. Again, welcome back to Recro Talks, and today we are going to talk about contributing to open source developers roadmap to get started. Let me quickly introduce our speaker for the day. We have Bhavani Ravi with us today. She works as an independent software consultant. She teaches Python via the Learning Dev. She's also a tech blogger, speaker, and an open source contributor. She leads communities like GDG and Women Techmakers in Chennai. Thank you so much, Bhavani, for joining us today. I'm sure it is going to be so much fun. 100 plus people are already here. You can go ahead and say hi to the audience.
Hello, everyone. Super excited to meet you all on a Saturday evening. I hope your time is going to be worth it for the next 45 minutes or so. So keep your questions coming. I am super excited to answer all your questions. So let's quickly get started. Rashmi has given a wonderful introduction about me. To quickly summarize it, I'm an independent software consultant and I contribute to open source projects. I write technical blogs at my blog, bhavaniravi.com. And apart from that, I run this venture called the Learning Dev, which is like a community / coaching platform. And I run the community Google Developers Group Chennai. Okay. So that's like a quick introduction about me, but not spending a lot of time on there. This talk is about open source, right? So we should be talking more about that. So let's get started. I kind of gave away the answer slowly. So anytime that you want to start contributing to open source, or start learning anything that for that matter, what you will do is you will go to Google and ask, hey, okay, Google, can you help me with this? I don't know why. Okay, yeah. Can you help me with this? How do I get started with open source? And what do you specifically see on the screen? And have you tried this? Have you tried Googling how to start with open source? And what was your experience? Confusing? Okay. No clear explanation. Went to Linux. Didn't know exactly what to do. Not so clear, yeah. So these are some of the problems that I also faced when I started. So everybody was talking about open source and open source. And when I went and looked about, what is open source, there come this concept of, instead of companies building the code and keeping it for themselves without exposing it to the outside world, you have this organization which writes code in public and it's available for public. You can change, modify, distribute, and commercialize those code. And we as developers can collaboratively contribute your code to that particular code base. And all of this is available open and for free to use. So in that is open source. And in that case, there should be, it's all open, right? There should be better tutorials for us to go through. But unfortunately, when I searched internet, just like you were confused, I was also kind of confused as to where to start and how to go about it. So then when I went ahead, the next possible step that happened to me was I went ahead and asked people, how do I contribute to open source? Have you tried that? Have you tried asking your fellow mates or your peers about how to get started with open source? And what was their response like? Learned it on my own, not sure. Okay, even if you haven't search on GitHub. Yes, that's something people always do. Check GitHub. Yeah, GitHub. Okay, my story might be in a little later. Like this was 2 years back. And back then, open source was not getting a lot of attention in India per se. But this is what people told me. You have to be an awesome programmer. First, get your programming skills right. Then you can start thinking about open source. And some people told me like, I know, you want to contribute to open source and all, but have you really considered doing some projects by yourself before going to open source? Because it's a huge ocean. It's a scary world. Why don't you try building something by your own, then, going and contributing to an existing project? And then people said you should be experienced, you should have at least some experience. And then when you go to Quora, it's all about Linux. Linux everywhere. Does that mean people who use Windows cannot contribute at all? So these are some things that people told me which turned out to be wrong. But there are some things which people told and that actually turned out to be true. You need to have your programming skills right. When I say programming skills right, you don't have to be an expert Pythonista or expert Golang or expert in Ruby. You just have to know your basics right. And all of these basics are coming from your school and college. Everybody has learned a for loop. Everybody can think about logic. So if you can think and write a particular logic, when I say logic, I don't mean hacker rank problems or leak code problems. Those are like competitive programming. When you look at a problem and you can convert that into code, that's good enough. And Git is absolutely essential. And even if you don't know Git at the initial stages, you can learn it as and when you're contributing to a project. And you need to know your way around terminal, how to run a Python program or how to run a Golang program. That is a good place to start with. Always follow the contributor guidelines. When I say contributor guidelines, just like when you join a company, they are going to tell you, you have to write code in certain format. Similarly, in open source, people are going to tell you that you have to write code in a certain format. You have to abide to that. And it takes insane amount of patience and effort. I'm not gonna lie to you saying it's very easy and stuff like that. It's difficult, but it's totally worth it. Okay, so I went around in the recent era. All of these was 2 years back. So I went around and asked people what open source meant to them in the last 2 years. How has it helped them evolve? And open source has been like this uncovered territory especially for Indian developers, and it's slowly being distributed to us. And it's this uncharted window of opportunity. For example, people have contributed to open source, and immediately the moment your code goes in, you get this visibility that you never thought you would get. Your LinkedIn will be filled with job postings or consulting opportunities, stuff like that. And that also depends on the project, but it's totally worth it. This is from Sayantika. She contributes a lot to the Python community. Next is from Vilvadipan. He actually used the React community. He has contributed to a lot of React specific projects. And he thinks that open source is a gym that is equivalent to the ones that athletes use. It's your training ground where you can explore what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and work on them. The third one is from UV Panda. This is not a quote per se. You have to go check out his open source journey altogether. He started as a GSOC member and then GSOC attendee. From there, he went and contributed to Genome project and Jupyter project, and then Binder, and followed by UC Berkeley. So he built his whole life around open source and making contribution to open source. So that is a career trajectory that's still possible. So those are all the possibilities. Now it's time to write down your code. What is your code going to be? Why do you think that you should contribute to open source, right? So take a moment to write about it in your notepad or on the chat so that we all can see it. The best time to teach something is when you're in the process of learning it. I truly believe in this. So in open source, there are different grades, right? One is just a contributor. You put some of your code inside, and then comes your maintainer, where you maintain all the code. You ensure that other people are abiding to the rules of the repository. And there comes another where you're a core contributor. You ensure that proper features are going in every release of the software. Open source is nothing but a software, right? It works like a software company. So there are different grades to it. I am on the grade 1 where I'm just a contributor. I just put my code in. So I am also in the process of learning, and I have got past the beginner stage. That is why I want to share this journey with you. So the best time to teach something is when you're learning it. And if you're learning something right now, you have to go ahead and teach it. Okay. So what are we learning today? Finally, now that we know what open source is, how people have contributed, how to get the benefits of it, 2 core things that we are going to cover today. What is open source? Why is of open source contribution? And how do you make your first contribution? And both of this is from my personal experience. I have defined this framework. So most of you, if you're in college or if you've been in college, you would have heard this from your seniors, For a job, you need experience. For you to gain experience, you need job. And open source is the only true way which has proven to give you experience without actually holding a job. What does a job expect, right? what does the job expect? It wants you to it wants you to build a software. You should be able to write some code. You should be able to work with a team. You should be following some best practices, and you should be humble and collaborative enough for the team to work with, right? So all of this, when you contribute to open source, it's getting checked. More than a resume, you're building credibility. You're showing that you're very smart and sweet to work with. You're following the best practices of the industry. You're learning from the experts. You are collaborative, and you have the work experience of working with people across the board. What more do you need, right? So more than a resume, for me, my open source contribution has done a lot of work in terms of attending interviews. Whenever we go to interviews, it's no longer the matter of looking at the resume. It was more a matter of opening pandas and looking at the code I've written, and then it's just 1 or 2 questions over that because pandas already accepted it, right? So now you have to take a step back and think about, why do you want to contribute to open source? Is it for it doesn't matter what the reason is. Maybe getting a better job, maybe getting a better internship offer, maybe going abroad, maybe working for Google. That can also be a path that you can take. So whatever your path may be, write it down, take 2 seconds so that we can reflect on this. So now that we have reflected on it, we are slowly entering the framework as to how I made my first contribution and why this works. Okay. So the story starts about 2 years back when I was working for this company called Kissflow, and we were building this reporting module on top of an existing platform. So we have data and we need to come up with some visualizations on the UI. Anytime you talk about data and visualizations and Python, the first thing that comes to mind is pandas. So that was the problem we were dealing with. And even if you drill down further, one of the problems was to flatten Python dictionaries. And if you're not familiar with Python, or if you're new to it, just stick with me for a moment. So in Python, there is this concept called dictionaries, and you have to flatten it. Let me show you a quick, So this is how a typical Python dictionary looks. And if your data looks something like this, for example, your biography has your name and your Twitter ID. This is not my Twitter ID, but by the way. And if your profile has image type and the image URL. So this is my input data. And this is the output data I was getting, completely flattened. Bio.name, bio.twitter, profile image.type, profile image.url. But my expected output for that one particular use case is to get bio.name, bio to be expanded, and profile image to be not expanded. This was my use case. And I had to go and check if any of the existing solutions that is available, right? I don't know why I can't see this changing. Okay. Now you have to start as a user. Doesn't matter which library you're using. For me, it was pandas. For you, it could be something in JavaScript. For you, it could be something in Ruby or Golang. So it doesn't matter what language, what library, it should be something you are using, right? That is my second point. Start as a user, something that you're already using. If you're a developer, I am pretty sure that you will be using 1 or 2 libraries in your life, right? Be it requests in Python, Airflow. It can be small or it can be super huge, right? So this was a very small function in pandas. So I thought, okay, why not let's use it? And again, it gave me this particular output, not the one I wanted. And when I looked at pandas documentation, there was nothing about looking for a specific key and flattening only that. So here's some takeaway. This is the light bulb moment or a eureka moment for me when I realized, all the code out there, be it open source or be it proprietary, owned by a company, or it's available for free for everyone, all open source code is written by humans, which means there's always room for improvement. There is always going to be some mistakes because human beings are prone to making some error, right? So every code out there is being written by a human being like you. So there is going to be room for improvement, and you can be the one making that improvement. So that is what I did, be the critic and finding faults at, why not there is a specific key level, specific parameter that I can pass to this function, which will ignore this particular key and only flatten the rest of the items, right? And probing further on that, why not there is like a maximum level indication, which will let me only flatten it to a certain level. For example, if it's a nested dictionary, for example, this is a nested dictionary. In fitness, I don't want to do it for level 1. I just want to stop it at level 0. In that case, why not there is a max level parameter? At this point, both of these are not supported in pandas. I was the one proposing it. So the next step is to raise issues, not even like a write code. You have to just go to the particular GitHub repository and say, I've been facing this issue. This is my use case. And can I make a contribution to this? That's just a request. So that's how you do it. So here's my open source issue that I've raised. I want to ignore certain keys when I flatten JSON. So that's my issue. And I've explained them why that is a use case, why that is prevalent, why it's common. And I also offered to fix it. So once you raise the issue, people from the pandas community or the community that you're working for will come and say, okay, go ahead. And this looks like a valid feature. If you want to go and contribute, go ahead and contribute. So that's what you do next. You have to go ahead and fix them. So fixing them has 4 steps to it. And this, again, can differ based on the project that you're contributing to. And for pandas or for most open source project, you have to fork the repository, make a copy of that repository in your GitHub profile. You have to clone that code into your local machine, just like how you develop any application. And you have to edit the specific files, and you have to make the pull request. Again, what file you're editing, what code you are adding, it can be very threatening, it can be very scary, but trust me, this process you cannot escape. You have to make changes to the code. You're not going to break anything because they are not going to let you break. So you're free to explore, free to change, run test cases. And this will take, depending on the problem that you're solving, it can take somewhere from 2 days to 3 months or 6 months. Doesn't matter. Your time is your time, right? So once you do all of this, once you're happy with your code, don't think about it too much, because the process that's coming next is a little bit tedious than this. Right? Once you have the code, once you are happy with it, create a pull request, and your pull request goes in, and this is what happens. For just a 4-line change for JSON normalize with 2 features added, 4 files changed. It went through 11 automated checks on the CI/CD pipeline, and it went back and forth 77 commits. They asked me to make million ton of changes just for the 4-line change, be it adding documentation, be it adding test cases, and the back and forth conversation on how can I make that particular 4 files better had 70 conversations in them. So after all of this, 6 months, it took me only 2 days to put the code inside, but 6 months later, the code finally got merged. And I was on cloud 9 for 2 days. My feet was not on the floor. I was just jumping up and down for complete 2 days. It was totally worth it. The whole process was not threatening. It's just that you have to be on the flow, right? All the community members are going to be keeping you on tabs. You just have to answer their questions, see why, tell them why you think your way is better. All of this is going to come handy, but this moment is worth working forward. So yeah, my code is inside pandas. It's been a part of 0.25.0 edition. If you go to pandas documentation, you can still see max level parameter being added to JSON normalize. So that brings me to the framework of whatever we have discussed right now. Pick a problem or pick a package that you're already using. Don't go just because you want to learn Golang today. Don't go and look for a Golang project. Look for something you're using today, right now. For example, beautiful. If you're Python absolute beginner, you'd have seen Beautiful Soup or Request. If you're not looking at any of it, it's okay. You can still be on your learning journey. Whenever you come across a particular library, be it Flask. Flask is like very basic web framework, right? So you can go and read this code. Start as a user. Once you start using that application, you will see some faults in it. It's all written by humans. You will absolutely see some faults. Or maybe you get curious as to how this works. Go read their code base. And then if you find a fault, when you find a fault, raise issues, fix them, and you will get your Eureka moment. And again, I want to insist on the fact that it's not going to be easy, but it's absolutely worth it. And for you, where to start? This is a very common mistake. In side projects, you can build multiple projects to showcase different set of skills. In open source, pick one library and stick to it. It can be a library that you use every day, that you use on a project, you like their community, they are very helpful. So you have to pick and choose which community you are going to contribute to. Don't spread very thin, because contributing requires a kind of commitment to that particular repository. So in case of Pandas, it comes with one contributing guide. Every open source project out there has this contributing guide. If people want, if the code maintainers want you to contribute, they're going to have this contributing guide. And with the contributing guide, they will have step-by-step instructions as to how to set up the repository, how to run the code locally, how to run test cases, how to make changes, how to add documentation, how to run test cases, all of this. And to start with, in any particular library, there is also good first issues. I usually don't suggest good first issues, because if there are like 100 functions and you use only 5, good first issues may not be a good place to start. It would be that 5 functions that you already know very well. Go ahead, look through the code and understand how it works internally. Just because the package is already written and available, don't use it blindly. So this will be a learning experience. And it's not just about code, right? A lot of people would have thought, it's all going to be about code. It's, if you're not making code contribution, you're not an open source contributor. I do not agree with that, because I've seen all of these counts, right? So right from reading code is for your betterment. When you read good code, you're going to write good code. So obviously, I suggest everybody to spend at least an hour or so every day reading good code. Reading good code is obviously in open source. And asking questions. If you have doubts, asking questions on Stack Overflow, asking questions on GitHub, all of those counts, because by asking question, you're also answering someone else's question. And raising issues. If you find faults, just by raising issues, your job is done. You don't have to make a code contribution. And answering other people's question. Maybe someone is struggling at a spot that you have already experienced. The best time to teach something is when you're learning it, right? You have already learned something. Why not go and share it? And another thing is how to use the repository. A blog post about how to use it in different contexts, different use cases, different functionalities. All of these counts. And just, for example, Python and all releases a test, a test version for you to test and raise bugs. So testing those libraries is also a well-defined area that you can contribute to. Finally, documentation. Every open source project needs good documentation so that people like you and me can go ahead and contribute and use the library without any hassles. So documentation is a great place to start. And here is one of the contributions that I have made to Rasa. By not writing one piece of code, all I did was wrote a few blog posts and ran Rasa hackathons in Chennai. And I am being accredited as Rasa Superhero contributor, and I still hold that position. This was 3 years back. So these are all some of the best ways to contribute to open source. It's not always about code. If you say you don't have any time, this is something I suggest myself. Even I have the problem. And everyone, each one of us have the problem. If you say you have no time, and make GitHub your Instagram. We are all mindlessly scrolling Instagram, no doubt about it. Scroll through some code. If you're using Instagram for 1 hour, nothing wrong with that. Scroll GitHub for 15 minutes, right? So that is the only way forward. You have to sit in front of computer. You have to read through code. You have to make some changes. You have to fail a million times, wait for 6 months, go through 77 changes. After that, one day it will suddenly click. If you're ready to contribute and you think, maybe I'll finish this one project and then I'll start. Maybe I'll finish this exam and then I'll start. Spend like 5 minutes every day. Timing is always right. And there's going to be always open source hackathons or something or the other happening in the world right now, right? So in October, you will have Oktoberfest. If you go to open source platforms, there'll be some sprints or something happening in the open source world always. So you can go ahead and start right away. Timing is right now. And this is the mantra for open source. There is no shortcuts to this. There's no easy way to it. Passion, persistence, and a lot of patience, because people are going to give you a lot more comments, a lot of feedbacks. So you need a lot of patience. So that's all the content I had for today. I would be happy to answer all your questions. The Q&A is filled with 31 questions. I hope I can do justice to that. So let's do the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bhavani, for this wonderful presentation. A lot of learnings from there. If you can just turn off your screen share and we can go to the questions then.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. So there are around 33 questions. I think you are the best person to pick up which question is quite relevant to the session. So go ahead and choose your questions.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to just read through all the questions and quickly give you one or two lines about it. Ethical hacker, I'm not an ethical hacker, so I think you should ask someone who's doing that for their everyday, and then you will get a better understanding. I mean, that's something about tech, right? You think that just because someone is so famous or something, they know everything about technology. No, actually, we know very, very little. There is so much in technology that you can cover. So I will find some ethical hacker, or you can find one yourself and ask this question. Roadmap for web development. I have something on my site. I will send that to you if you reach out to me on Twitter. Send the recordings. Yes, Recro will send you the recordings as soon as possible after this event. Is data scientist required for open source? Absolutely not. Data science is just another field of technology. You can, for example, pandas is not just data science, right? It's also data analytics. It's also manipulating data. So it's not just about data science. It can be as simple as scraping websites. That also counts as open source contribution. There are enormous open source libraries. Python is an open source programming language. Golang is an open source programming language. As in, the code is available for you to look through and read. So it's all about what programming language you already know, what libraries that you're already using. So that is the intersection is where you can contribute. Is these languages are needed? I don't know what you mean, but yes, you need to be at least well-versed in one programming language, be it C++. Python is written in C. So even if you know C very well, you can go ahead and read that code. Or if you want to contribute to something in Python, for example, pandas is written in Python. React.js is written in JavaScript. So you need at least one core fundamental language to contribute to open source. Roadmap for web development. Again, if you ping me on Twitter, I can share something. Could you share the link to download the PPT? Yes, the PPT is already up on my site. And if you want it, I can send it to Recro as well. Roadmap. Okay. Since this has been coming up so much, there is a roadmap.sh. That's a website. HTTP www.roadmap.sh. So that website has roadmap for full stack, backend, front end, all of those. So you can go through that. How to write good docs? That is more on the application that you're building. And it's not like get it right at the first time. You have to write some documentation first, and people will be asking questions as to I am stuck at this point, or I am getting confused at this point. So it's a refining process. You have to keep updating your documentation for you to arrive at a good documentation. There are general aspects as to think about a newbie using your project. You don't have to teach them Python at all, but you have to start somewhere, right? What is that starting point? What is their trajectory? How are they going to evolve through the documentation? So those are some questions to ask and evolve. How to find an organization for open source contribution? Again, I don't know, people are talking about looking for a particular organization, for example, Google's open source projects or Facebook's open source project. The problem is if you're not using it, you don't have the exposure to what that library is doing. For example, if you're using TensorFlow every day, then you will understand what TensorFlow does and what are the additions you can make, right? Without that, just blindly going through an organization or just for the sake of it, if you find a project, you will be stuck. You will be demotivated. So go for a project that you already know. Go for the project, like you say, right? Work for a manager, not for the company. Similarly, go for a project, go for a library that you are very well versed with, so that you can get over the hurdle. How to be consistent? How much hours should we code? And how will we know whether we are ready for open source? You will never know whether you're ready, right? You just have to start at reading code. First step is to read code, read other people's code. If you have never read other people's code, open source is a great way to start. Maybe you don't have colleagues. For me, when I started open source, I have already had 3 years of experience. I have gone through my colleagues' code, so it was not threatening. But when you start, it can be threatening to read other people's code. Maybe for the first 6 months, all you do is read some code, right? And that will give you some confidence to go and edit some code. And that is the next step, maybe next 6 months. There is no right or wrong about timing. how many hours you code, how many hours do you have at your hand, right? A college student has a different time at hand. This is someone who's married and has five kids. So it's all up to you to decide as to how much time you have. Start with 5 minutes per day to 1 hour per day. You can mix and match on how much time you have at hand. How is the code submitted, reviewed? If anyone can contribute, how is the integrity of the project maintained? This is where maintainers and so the question is, how is the code submitted, reviewed? So this is where maintainers and code contributors comes into the picture. They have extensive test cases, extensive test cases. For example, you have to write for that two additions I had added. You have to test almost all the scenarios in unit test cases, and they will have built pipelines. For example, the 11 checks I showed, right? It will check out every piece of your code that you have added newly. Be it, it also has performance testing, ensures that just because you added two new parameters, it shouldn't take a longer time to build that application or run that function. So it also has performance test cases. And after all of that checks, only your code goes in. That's why it takes a longer time for you code to actually go in. People in this process is where they lose their heart, because there's going to be a lot of back and forth. But this process is what ensures that your code is on par with their guidelines, right? So they are not going to let you easy, because it's going big. For example, pandas is being almost used by all the data science companies. Any issues in there, they're not going to let you go off the hook. So that is the most difficult project, and they have very strong guidelines, and that is the only way open source is going to work. And that's why it's the best code out there as well. Invent like a local language computers. Great idea. If you persist on that idea, let me know. Is Ruby or Perl now considered as old languages instead of Python, C++, Flutter, Java are considered to be new, better? Actually not. Ruby on Rails specifically has a lot of projects going on. Even like startups are starting using Ruby even now. If you say Java is new, Java is absolutely not new. Java is years old, and there are a lot of Java projects also. Most people choose languages based on what their personal preferences are. Maybe, so for example, I started with Java, and my first job demanded to learn Python. So I learned Python and stuck with it. So it's all a personal preference. You can learn 10 languages, or you can just stick to one language. If what works for you, works for you. How do we start coding? This is my first tweet on my Twitter profile. Sit in front of the computer, pick one resource, one programming language, open it on the side, have your code editor on the left, start coding. And even if you hate it, come back the next day until you fall in love with it. So that's the only way forward. Name the sites where we can search for good open source projects. Go to your particular project that you're already using. If you're using Python, it will be requirements.txt. If you're using JavaScript, it will be packages.json. Look for a library that you find very comfortable with. That is the good open source project to start with. Suggest any resources, materials, books about GitHub. Okay, if you want GitHub 101, there is something called as Free Code Camp. Free Code Camp has a lot of free resources when it comes to Python, JavaScript, every particular programming language. There are like a lot of free resources out there. You can check them out. Free Code Camp is 100% guaranteed. You will learn a lot. Just that you have to stick with it and practice it. So GitHub, there is a learning curve for Git and GitHub. Unless you use it on a project, you can't learn it just by seeing the concepts or just by absorbing it. You have to use it in the everyday practice. Use it as a part of your project. Is there alternatives instead of coding? We have covered all the alternatives, like writing from blog posts to documentation to running hackathons. If you are running events, all of that counts. First year, I have opted for open source specialization as my Hans. Should I proceed? Absolutely. If you have chosen it, there should be like some reason for it. You thought it would be good for you. And I trust your decision. Don't question it once you made it. Do you need too much math for coding? Absolutely not. I am the example for that. I would struggle at even basic mathematics. That's why I'm not a data scientist. I'm a proud backend engineer. I'm a Python beginner. Please tell me, how can I become a Python professional? The moment you start writing some code for projects, you are a professional. The moment you start working with some people, you are a professional. So start building some projects, one or the other. Start from a basic to-do list application, and from there on, you can take it forward. Yeah, this is any good issues we can look for. I search GitHub, most of them is already taken. This is a common problem. I also have it. I find an anxiety issue and I go there and people already have started contributing to it. And it can be a little disheartening at first, but the thing is, there's someone already looking at it. So the ways you can still incorporate yourself is, maybe that person dropped a PR. Someone has raised a PR and dropped it halfway. You can pick it up. Or someone is actively building it, you can give them a helping hand. You can just reach out to them and say, is there any way I can share a piece of it? So do it for the community. Don't do it for your brand as such. Do it in good heart. It will actually show through. People will be actually be accommodating. What was the role of open source in your career decisions? What made you choose consulting instead of going for some big org like Google? One big org like Google did not want me. That's number one. Second thing was I was working at a big organization. For example, my previous company was Sama Technologies, and we built a system for COVID vaccine trials for Pfizer, who released the first ever COVID vaccine. We have our hands in there. But I had to take my entrepreneurship route. That's why I moved to become a software consultant. That's my only decision. It's just pure personal choice. Should I have to be a competitive programmer in CodeChef for you to start with open source? See, competitive programming in CodeChef builds a different kind of, just like you said, it's a competitive programming skill. It's not programming skill, right? You see, Rekha bought 5 chocolates kind of problems and you solve them. But open source needs some kind of that also, but it's not just competitive programming, it's more of problem solving. Generally, if someone gives you, write a calculator program, and then you ask what are the calculator functions, what are the functionalities this will provide. So it's a different kind of skill set. Just because you can't solve CodeChef or HackerRank problems doesn't mean you're not a good programmer. For example, I can't solve HackerRank or CodeChef problems even now completely. So it's a practiced skill and it needs a different kind of muscles altogether. How do you know where to contribute? It's also possible they judge you because they are much more experienced. Absolutely not true, because open source is the most accommodating place. They are so happy to have new contributors. For example, when I made my first PR, I was so anxious as to what they're going to tell me. But the first thing that they told me was, thank you for your first contribution. It means a very lot to us. So that was the first comment that they said. So it's a most welcoming community out there. Open source is not there because of first, it's there for some reason, right? It's very accommodating and it's very comforting. It makes beginners so welcomed, and you will actually step up in your coding learning journey much more faster than at doing any other projects. Can you bypass 3 rounds of interview process technical by control? Absolutely. For example, when I was interviewing for Sama, I just opened open source code, and the questions was on the code that I have contributed already to Pandas, and the answers was given and the offer was raised. But this does not work in the campus interview process, because campus interview has these levels. You won't get exposed to technical people unless you clear the aptitude. But for applying outside, if you have open source contribution, you don't even have to apply. People will automatically come to your LinkedIn and ask for it. Just that you have to promote it on LinkedIn, say that you have contributed to it, add it to your projects. Then people will automatically, come and ask, can you work for me? That has happened. That will happen. I feel like you have been using Flask. I want to ask, in order to recreate this API, would you use Flask? Fast API has been getting a lot of reception right now. I haven't explored it yet. I'm still using Flask, but Fast API is on my list to explore. What to do when you can't understand the terms used in the issues? That comes from maybe you can look at that in the documentation. For example, something that's been used in the issues is reference to something on the code. Something that's already there on the code will obviously be on the documentation. So documentation is where you go and search for that particular term to understand more about that particular concept. Just like I said, Pandas has a ton of functions. I would not know all the functions, but it will definitely be there on the documentation. Is building personal projects worth it? Absolutely worth it. Starting a project and taking it to completion shows a lot of courage, shows a lot of persistence. shows a lot of consistency from your side, and that is a very important skill even in a corporate environment. What if someone takes your idea and worked on it before you? That is the aspect of open source, right? The moment you create an issue, you have to say, I'm open to work. If you want to work on it, you have to say, I'm open to working on it. And if someone else is going to take up before you work on it, it's absolutely possible. And that is the part of the community. Again, collaboration is all about it. It's all for the benefit of, open source community, right? So you have to live with it. You can find other projects to contribute, or you can actually take a position of design expert in that aspect, because it's your feature that they are implementing. You can say, I envision this feature to be something else. Maybe help in code reviews, maybe write test cases. So those are some of the things that you can do. Absolutely, it's also taking a load from you. So yeah, I think I've answered all the questions. I just have one more thing to tell all of you. I'm going to share my presentation again. For those of you who asked or want to build a Python project, I run a month-long Python projects bootcamp. So if you already know some basics of Python and you want to start building your projects, this is my bootcamp. It's a paid bootcamp. If you want free resources, that's also there. You can DM me, I'll send it to you later. But this is a paid bootcamp. And with Recro, just for the people who are attending this workshop, they get a $25 off. It's right now, and it's only available for a limited number of seats. This is the link, bit.li/recro.recrooss. So grab it right away. I'll also put it on the chat. And that's pretty much it. I had super fun talking to all of you and answering all of your questions.
Thank you so much, Bhavani, once again for joining us. I have already shared the link in the link to join the Slack community. Be a part of the community if you want to learn, and attend more such session. Also, if you want to grow in your career, just feel free to visit Recro's career page. You will get to know all the open positions that we have. Again, share your key learnings on LinkedIn and tag us. I hope you guys had fun attending this session, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. In the meantime, take care and stay safe. Thank you so much, Bhavani, once again for joining us. Thank you so much.